Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. My name is Miriam, and today I will be going over some Victorian novels in honor of Victober. So if you don't know what Victober is, it is a month-long readathon here on BookTube, and it is held by some amazing ladies, and I will leave their channels linked below. And the whole purpose of Victober is to celebrate Victorian literature, and there are different prompts for different books you can read. And in honor of that, I wanted to share some books that are either Victorian classics or are set in the Victorian era, if you are interested in that time period. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started with the Victorian classics that I have. So these are in no particular order, and the first one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is a Victorian novel that I just recently read and absolutely loved. It is so gothic and fun, and a very interesting book. It is told through letters entirely, and if that is something that you think you would enjoy, I would highly recommend Dracula. It's not as scary as I thought it would be, but it's definitely spooky and gothic and just a fun book, to be completely honest. It was a lot more fun than I was expecting it to be. We have a lawyer from England who travels to Transylvania, and he stays at Count Dracula's castle. He's there to help Count Dracula with some financial things, and I think Dracula's interested in buying some property in London, and Jonathan Harker, this lawyer, he starts noticing some things in this castle, and the story goes from there. And we have some very interesting characters in this book. One of my favorite characters, Mina, she is one of my favorite female protagonists that I've ever read in a classic, and I would highly recommend this book. I think Bram Stoker did an amazing job with his characters and the gothic elements, and this book is just awesome for this time of year especially. This next book, while it's not set in the Victorian era, it is a Victorian classic. It was written in the early Victorian period, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is probably my favorite Bronte novel thus far. I love this book. It is a book that you need to go into knowing that it is not a romance novel. If you've been told or are under the impression that this is a romance, it's not. It's very depressing. It will leave you feeling very angry at times, but I think the writing is just beautiful, and I was swept away by the atmosphere of this story. I think Emily Bronte is my favorite writer this far. I wouldn't say that this story in itself is my absolute favorite, but it's just all of the elements of this book that just created a 5-star read for me. I absolutely love it. And if you're looking for something more atmospheric for this time of year and want to read a Victorian novel, I would recommend this one. I really like the way that the story is told as well. We have a man who comes to Yorkshire, and I'm pretty sure his name is Mr. Lockwood. I'm not quite sure on that, but he comes to Yorkshire and he is a new tenant in this house, and he starts to learn about this family. Honestly, these characters are very unlikable, but I feel like the ending of the story makes up for the book, and there is hope at the end, which I really like. When I first read this, I did struggle a little bit through it. It was difficult to get into, but after I finished reading it, I just knew it was a 5-star read for me. And funny enough, I needed to make a character outline. That's another thing I would recommend with this book, is if you are confused about the characters and their names, it really does help to either look up like a family tree or make one yourself like I did, because I was a little extra. So I do have the characters here on this sheet, and this really helped me understand what was going on and who every character is, because there are a couple characters with the same names. But all in all, this is definitely a favorite Victorian classic. I'm just in love with it, and I really hope I can reread it soon. Yeah, that is Wuthering Heights. Next up, if you're looking for something fun and lighter with puzzles and just more mysterious but not being too dark, I would recommend The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is a collection of short stories, and it's a great place to begin with Sherlock Holmes if you've never read any of the stories. Not all of these have to do with murder. Some of them have to do with theft and just other types of crimes, but I would say that this series in general is just so fun, and this particular collection of short stories is probably my favorite out of the series. I kind of jump back between this and The Hound of the Baskervilles, but this is definitely a highlight in the entire series, and really fun if you're looking for some short stories or just something lighter for this time of year. I would definitely recommend this. I can't share Victorian classics, Victorian era novels without sharing A Christmas Carol and Other Stories. Christmas is coming very soon. It's already the end of October almost, and Christmas is going to be here before you know it. And this is the perfect Victorian story to pick up. If you don't know what A Christmas Carol is about, we have a crotchety man named Ebenezer Scrooge, and he's not a fan of Christmas. He's just not a fan of people in general. He's not the greatest guy, but he is visited by 3 different ghosts who kind of take him through what his life was, what it is currently, and what it could be if he doesn't change. And it's very much a heartfelt, heartwarming story that I feel a lot of people can relate to in some way. And it's just a beautiful story, perfect for the Christmas season, and one of my favorite Victorian stories for sure. Another Bronte novel, we also have The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and this one is a really, really interesting story. It is basically about a woman who moves to this new town or village, and people think that she is kind of sketchy in a way. She seems a little off and doesn't really involve herself in like the church scene and just the village life in general. She's kind of withdrawn and isolated, and she has a young boy as well. And the first narrator of the story is actually a man, and he is kind of intrigued by this woman who moves to his village, and he tries to get to know her a little more. And then the majority of the story is actually told through her diary entries, which, if you know anything about me, you know diaries and letters and things like that. Epistolary novels are definitely my thing, so I really, really enjoyed that. And through these diary entries, we learn about her past and what brought her to her new home, Wildfell Hall. And this is another very interesting story. It's not a favorite, but I still think it's a really great Victorian novel and would highly recommend. These last 2 classics are 2 of my favorite classics ever. I love them so, so much, and they're both Victorian classics. First up, we have North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This book is just amazing. We have Margaret Hale, who moves to the north of England. She grew up in the south in, I guess, wealthier conditions, and she's moving up to the industrial north, which is now, I think, Manchester. I think that's the area that this book is set. And she meets a mill owner named Mr. Thornton, and they really do butt heads because they each have their own prejudices, and it's kind of an enemies to lovers, which I really love. And it's not the kind of enemies to lovers that I feel would drive you insane if that's not something that you enjoy. I think the way that Elizabeth Gaskell did it is just beautiful and realistic, and the writing is beautiful. This is a very easy classic to read. I would definitely recommend, if you haven't read classics before, if you haven't read Victorian literature before, this is definitely a great place to start. The characters are amazing. They all have my heart, especially Mr. Higgins and Margaret Hale, Mr. Thornton. And what I really appreciate about Elizabeth Gaskell is the nuance that she adds to her stories, and the fact that some of the characters are not so black and white in terms of whether they're, good or evil. And she characterizes people in a way that you can both really, really not like them, but at the same time you feel compassion for them. And she just has a way with characters, she has a way with storytelling, and I just love this book, would highly recommend. The last Victorian classic on this list is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I read this for the first time, I think earlier this year or last year. Loved it. Fell in love with his writing, and this book also has one of my absolute favorite female characters of all time. Marion Halcombe is just amazing. She's an amazing main character. I think that the way Wilkie Collins writes females is beautiful. For a Victorian man to have written women like this, it blows my mind. I absolutely love it. This book is basically centered around a woman who is dressed all in white, and she is seen roaming through the countryside, and it kind of creeps some people out, and there's this whole mystery behind who she is and what she's doing outside, at night and in the dark, and it's kind of unsettling. One of our main characters, Walter, is one of the people who finds this woman roaming outside, and after he talks to her and she asks for directions, then a carriage comes by and they are looking for this woman who they say escaped from an asylum. This all happens very, very early in the book, so it's not a spoiler, but the story does go from there. Walter then goes to this house. I forget exactly what brings him to this house, but there he meets Marion, who is one of the other main characters. And the story goes from there, and it's a mystery, and it's kind of gothic and atmospheric and perfect for autumn, and also one of my favorite Victorian novels. This book is incredible. All right, so if classics aren't really your thing, but you are interested in the Victorian era, I do have 3 books that are set in the Victorian era. The first one is A Curious Beginning by Diana Rayborn. This book is the first book in the Veronica Speedwell series, and I have talked about this series a few times on my channel. I love it so, so much. It is a Victorian era mystery series, and we have a main character named Veronica. She's this very outspoken, very independent, science-obsessed lepidopterist. She studies butterflies. She has a lot of spunk. And one day, this man comes to her house. Her aunts, who were her guardians, have just passed away. And this man comes and he's basically saying, look, your life is in danger. There's a kidnapping attempt and she escapes that. But then this man who is, telling her, like, you need to get out of here, he helps her move to London and she moves in with this man named Stoker. This man who helped her ends up dead. And so Veronica and Stoker try to figure out who killed him and the motive behind the murder. And there are still some things happening that make her feel unsafe. And this book is just a fun ride. It's set in the heart of Victorian London and it's just perfect to read if you love that time period. The characters are amazing, and if you like good banter, I would highly recommend this book. The banter between Veronica and Stoker is some of the best that I've ever seen. It's just so funny. Would highly recommend. I have another Victorian mystery book to share, although this does take place in Egypt, but it is set during the Victorian era, and that is Crocodile on the Sandbank by Elizabeth Peters. This is the first book in the Amelia Peabody series, and I have to say that Veronica Speedwell and Amelia Peabody from this series, they're very similar in personality, and they both love science. Amelia Peabody definitely is more into archaeology and things like that. She ends up in Egypt and arrives at this archaeology site where she meets a potential love interest named Emerson, and I'm not going to say much else, but there is murder. There's just so much fun in this book. Amelia and Emerson have a very similar relationship and similar banter as Veronica and Stoker do, and I love it so much. This book is just pure escapism and fun, and it's also a perfect historical cozy mystery set in the Victorian era, so would highly recommend this as well. This last book is a very odd one, and I don't read a lot of this specific subgenre, but I definitely think it's very interesting and it might suit some of your reading tastes, and that is Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. This is a historical thriller, I would say, but it's magical realism, so there are certain magical elements that I don't think make this book a fantasy, but definitely make it weird. It's been a while since I read it, so I'm just going to read the back. It says, London, 1863, a strange puzzle has reached Bridie Devine, the finest female detective of her age. To recover a stolen child, Bridie must enter the dark world of medical curiosities. The public love a spectacle, and this child may well prove the most remarkable spectacle London has ever seen. This book is just very unsettling, but perfect for fall. A very spooky, atmospheric, historical Victorian novel. I love this so much. I had such a good time reading it. Very gothic, beautifully written, and this child that is featured in the story, also very creepy, very unsettling, but I would definitely recommend this book if it sounds like something you would enjoy. All right, everyone, so that is it for this video. Those are some Victorian era classics or historical fiction set in the Victorian era, and I just wanted to share them with you guys in honor of Victober. Some recommendations. If you haven't read any of these books, I would highly recommend them. And that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye!